Moderating this panel will be Nancy Hua, who is CEO and founder of Aptimize, a company that helps mobile teams increase revenue and engagement by iterating faster and smarter. Prior to founding Aptimize, Nancy spent several years as an algorithmic trader, and among other accomplishments, she has been named several times to the Forbes 30 Under 30 list. One of the really interesting things about this panel is that in addition to two seasoned executives from tech companies, it also features the voice of a CIO who can really help you see both the vendor and the buyer perspective of how a startup can really learn to land and expand and move up the food chain of large enterprise relationships. Nancy, over to you.
Thank you so much for the intro. Okay, so are we sitting?
Please have a seat.
Okay.
If you like.
Is this enough chairs for us? Isn't there? Okay, got it. Okay, this is good. So everyone should, here, I'll sit here, can give an intro for themselves, and because our panel is really exciting. We can also start with telling us your open thoughts on what land and expand means.
Great, so I'm Yvonne Wassenaar. I'm Chief Information Officer at New Relic. I've spent a little over 25 years both as a CIO and also as an executive in tech companies selling to CIOs. So I've sat on both sides of the fence, which is pretty fun. What I would say on land and expand, it's been interesting listening to the panels that came before. I joined New Relic a little over 3 years ago and helped take the company public, and we are one of the few companies who went from selling to the end user and predominantly an SMB into the pivot to enterprise. And I would echo how hard that shift is and how different that is. We also are a company that very heavily deploys land and expand. From my perspective, there's two different types of land and expand. There's land a certain type of product and sell other products. And then there's land a small deal and sell onto it. We do both, but for simplicity, I'll focus on the latter one. And New Relic has kind of known for trial deploy, small deployment, get developer love, and then go top down and kind of meet in the middle. What I would say is it's very powerful because CIOs don't control much of anything anymore. They influence a lot. And so having bottoms up adoption of product and top down is nirvana. What I will tell you is it's incredibly hard. And I'd boil the heart of land and expand down to a lot of what was said in the earlier panels. First, the buying process changes. So when you're a small land, somebody can swipe a credit card. There's no procurement process. There's no multiple buyers. So you have to appreciate land to expand, procurement, buying process changes. The second thing is who you're selling to changes. Typically, like in our case, we're going from the person who's actually on the device using the product to somebody who is many layers above them, and they don't get that moment of delight. And so how do you communicate to a CTO or a CDO or a CIO, hey, you're gonna love New Relic dashboards. And so just figuring out how you communicate that is very different, and what are their buyer values. That's the second thing. The third thing is competition. When you're landing, you're you can penetrate anywhere in a large company. When you start to get big enough that you're expanding and you want to do an MSA and all of that, I can tell you, I mean, we were in lots of places, AppD was, Splunk was, all these other competitors. As soon as you get big enough, you're doing the 6-7-figure deal, they're all flying in with all their executives. And so again, your strategy has to be very different.
Great. Hi, I'm Jason Liu. I'm the CEO of Savo. And I guess just a quick background. I've been kind of running private equity-backed companies now for about 20 years. First 10 years was primarily venture-backed. Was very fortunate. Had a lot of success there. Took a company public and had a big IPO, and then also ran a company that was sold to Novell. In the last 10 years, I've been doing later stage private equity. Been very fortunate. Ran one of the larger software companies in Europe, which we had a pretty sizable exit. And also was an operating partner at a pretty sizable private equity fund on Market Street. So I have also been on the other side of private equity, actually being an operating partner. And running portfolio companies, typically around 100 million in revenue. That's kind of my sweet spot, is taking companies around 50 to several hundred million. So that kind of scale is kind of where I've historically been focusing the last 10 years. And then currently Savo is a pretty exciting Sapphire-backed company. I joined about 2 years ago. We're the largest player and most exciting player in the sales enablement space. So all we focus on is sales productivity, large enterprise customers. So large enterprise customers like Dell and Citrix, Autodesk, but also some large banks, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley. So we focus quite a bit on land and expand. I guess the comment around land and expand that I would add is just seeing it over the last 20 years where I've focused on B2B selling in enterprises. It's really interesting to see how incredibly scientific and mechanized it is versus what things were like 5 or 10, even 20 years ago. What's really interesting is everyone now is really trying to figure out how you optimize that sales engagement process from initial, content creation and the digital marketing aspects all the way through ultimately customer success, and how you turn the knobs exactly right between the handoff between inside sales, SDR inside sales, and external sales. So it's pretty interesting to see how the world has now gotten very scientific now on how to look at those handoffs, and I can certainly opine on the topic because I spend all my time talking to CSOs, and it's pretty interesting, as I said, how it's evolved.
Hi, good evening, and I recognize that we stand in between you and cocktails, so thanks for staying with us. My name's Chris Ball. Started out in the Valley, started a number of companies here in the Valley. Some were successful and some failed, but they happened pretty quick, and then somehow, against my better judgment, ended up at SAP. As a matter of fact, a good friend of yours convinced me to go there, and I spent 14 years at SAP running multi-billion-dollar businesses for them. And when I look at those businesses, the majority of my P&L, someplace between 60 and 70% of my P&L, was generated from sales into existing customers. So we were really good at land and expand, or we sucked at net new. One of those. I'm not sure which one. One of those was the case. I think it was we were really good at net new. At land and expand. So after 14 years, I left and I went to Lightspeed Ventures. And in my last 3 years at Lightspeed Ventures, I see hundreds, if not thousands, of cloud and SaaS companies. And more often than not, when they talk about their pitch, they talk about land and expand. And more often than not, they suck at it. Right? So it really made me stop for a moment and try and look back at what did we do and why was it so successful? And are there any learnings there that we could take and apply to some of our portfolio companies and really help them? And my major observation on it is that land and expand isn't a sales strategy. Land and expand is a business model. And if you don't approach it like a business model, you will ultimately fail. Because the trick to land and expand is the first word. You gotta nail the land. If you don't nail the land, the expand will never, ever happen. And a lot of organizations aren't set up to nail the land. And when they move into the expand, they're really not setting up their organization, the organizational structure, and all of the metrics around how do you really expand. So, I think the first question anybody needs to ask themselves when they think about land and expand is, what type of land and expand? And I think Yvonne kind of set it out. There are different types, very much dependent upon what your product offering is. And a few of the archetypes, for example, one is you have a horizontal product. And the land and expand is get a small cadre of users and then expand. Get more and more users to use that horizontal product, right? That's one. That's Splunk, right? Slack. That's Slack, right? It's the U for them is users. Get as many users as possible. It's a single product, right? There's other companies that their model is they actually have an approach where they want to sell business unit by business unit or department by department because they want to stay under the radar. They don't want the CIO and the head of procurement to start leveraging them, and they want to go where they can be nimble, where people have budget, people can make quick decisions, and so that's Business Objects did that like really, really well. They were like, the CIO one day was like, what the hell? Well, there's like 17,000 Business Objects implementations around this company. What the hell happened? The third approach, right? And then they call we need to do an enterprise deal, and they're like, okay. A third type of archetype is if your solution is the type where you can do really high value use cases across multiple lines of business or across multiple departments, that's a completely different approach. But what that really requires is the ability to ideate these use cases for different types of line of business stakeholders. And once again, all of these things drive org design. Where does customer support and satisfaction fit in? A lot of these different types of things. So, I mean, I guess that's my main takeaway is figure out what type of land and expand model is appropriate for your product offering, and then everything else comes from there.
Thanks for laying it out like that. So I think we're interested in knowing how do you transition into this from, like, maybe you have some early adopters and a lot of the companies in the audience are earlier stage. How do they land and expand after coming through some initial traction or repeatability? And then what are some of the pitfalls that they have to avoid in order to execute on that correctly? It sounds like you have ideas on how it's not just a single department thing, or maybe it's a cultural change, and maybe it's a whole business coming together to change all their business units thing.
So I'll take a cut at that. I mean, from what I would say, when you're a really small company, and my background, to give a little more context, I spent 17 years at Accenture, so I appreciated when Oracle implementations were $6 in services for every $1 of license. And then I also spent time at VMware. And what I would say is, when you're creating a new market and when you're starting out, everything is a land. And I think to the question earlier of ASP and, do I go for the 6-figure deal, or do I do something smaller and then expand over time? I mean, what I learned, I worked for Carl Eschenbach for years, and what I learned is, take the money off the table. If you can take the money off the table and drive sales velocity, take it off the table in a way that you're not screwing yourself in the future, but in a way that you can go back. But when you're small, what you want to do is get as many beachheads and get as much kind of feedback, I believe, from the people actually using the product and get that type of love, get that type of usage, because the stats thrown out earlier around Salesforce, I mean, I'm a CIO. I look at that stuff and I go to the head of sales and I say, hey, do you realize you're paying this many $1 million and you only have this type of usage? And then we go back, and I actually believe, sorry, this Salesforce folks, but that's going to be a dead technology because it's not adopted. And so you need to have end user adoption or it will not succeed. People will not pay the high dollars. So I believe you start by doing a whole lot of lands. Then what you have to figure out is, back to the business model point, what is the expand strategy? First, in my mind, you have to figure out whose responsibility is it. And I don't know there's a right answer. At New Relic, we started off with, we had people who landed, and then we had people who expanded. And so we had 2 different sales teams on different comp plans. And then we decided, no, we're going to move to an account management model where the same people who land can then expand. And then we moved to an SDR model. We've tried many models, and clearly the company's doing well, so some of them worked. What I would say is, what's more important than the model you pick is, how do you align comp and how do you get the rest of the ecosystem to support it? And so the next set of things that I think about when going from land to expand is, you're not done with the customer when you finish the sale and you get the order and you recognize the revenue. So we had to create a customer success team. We had to create customer health dashboards. We're a SaaS company. We can see exactly what people are doing with our products. We had to, Lou Cerny's known for 2 famous blogs. One, he said we would never do steak dinners. We went into enterprise. We now build relationships. We do steak dinners. The second is, his big learning from Wiley was, my God, it's just too hard to implement. I'm going to build a product that needs no services. So for the longest time, we had no education. We had no professional services. If you couldn't figure out how to use New Relic technology, you didn't deserve to get that beautiful product. That literally was the mentality. And when we went from landing with the developers to expanding into enterprise, and I will tell you, for myself and my counterparts in the CIO world, we want to accelerate adoption. We've got to do this stuff at scale. So Your product needs to be deployable not just on a single server or for a single set of users. It has to, how do you scale it out? You have to figure out, well, what type of education do people need or want? So you really, I think, to Chris's point, need to think through that business model of, you're going from end users to this broader set, and how do you align that up?
Why did you guys go through so many different models of the account management teams? Was it not working, or is it just the evolution of landing and expanding?
I would say it's a couple things. One is New Relic did a couple pivots at the same time. So we went from one product, which was our server product, APM, into 5 products in about a 6-month period. We went from SMB into a strong pivot into enterprise. And to the earlier comment, you have to rebuild your entire team. That's when we brought Hillary over, who'd run sales at Salesforce. And she came in and literally rebuilt the entire approach to sales. So we pivoted there. And then the third thing is we were experimenting with this land and expand. And I think similar to pricing, when you go through this, you want to test some different models. And I actually believe, having worked in companies as small as 30 people up to 300,000 at Accenture, there's not one model that fits a company its entire duration. And so some people are like, well, what's the model? It's like, there is no one model. Like, you have to look at who are you trying to serve, what are the resources you have, and how do you evolve it over time? And I'm sure you've seen a lot of that and how people enable their sales force and like what they do. I think it's just a natural progression.
Those transitions sound interesting to hear more about. Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna add, I think, I think Yvonne and Chris talked about this whole kind of concept of understanding who you are and making sure that, you kind of understand your business model. And I think, to paraphrase, there's kind of a velocity play that's more of a viral kind of approach. And so that is obviously a different land and expand strategy than a larger enterprise. And in larger enterprise play, obviously, typically, you obviously look for use cases, and you try to, in many cases, have to identify multiple use cases within a customer to really increase the usage and also the user counts. And so really being very disciplined on the product marketing, the go-to-market side, and understanding exactly how users are using your product, and then building out those use cases, and then the delivery of that. And that obviously comes not just from a selling approach, but also with customer success. And your customer success person is obviously such a critical component of this, because that customer success person is obviously engaging at the customer level, driving delivery and driving usage. Because eventually you do have the CIO obviously asking, are people using this? The other thing I'd also add is you're also seeing a big change now with marketing, where marketing now is really thinking about not just around net new logos, but also how do you actually do a better job nurturing into your installed base. And so you're seeing a lot of advent now of ABM, which is account-based marketing, and also within marketing of how do you create a nurturing campaign within your installed base, so they're constantly improving and learning. So it's pretty interesting how things are getting so sophisticated.
I'll give you a few anecdotes. So we had a portfolio company at Lightspeed, and their model was pretty simple. Get in, do a proof of concept, make it successful, and then expand to bigger deals, right? And then what we found was they were not really successful at doing proof of concepts. And when we really peeled it back, we found out, because once they signed a deal and started to do a proof of concept, the salesperson and the sales engineer were really responsible for doing the proof of concept. And there were 2 guys in development who helped them, but their day job was developing the product. And then they tried, so okay, how can you have a model based on doing POCs when you don't have an organization that supports doing POCs? Right, so we help them create a proof of concept factory. And so that's what I mean. If usage, there's really 3 U's in land and expand. There's usage, there's users, and there's use cases, right? So depending on which one you covet, if you covet usage, having advocates around usage in your organization who are aligned is incredibly important. If use cases are the most important thing for your land and expand model, having people that know how to create use cases and articulate them is incredibly important. So, what we found at SAP was salespeople, there's an old adage about salespeople. They never want to talk about products or something that they're uncomfortable with, that they're not knowledgeable about. They never want to ask a question that they don't know the answer, or be asked a question that they don't know the answer to. So what they do is they tend to talk about the things that they know. What they also are creatures of habit. And what we'd find that our SAP salespeople would pull into, name an account, Cisco, and this huge building with 50,000 people, and inevitably they would walk the same hall to the same office and see the same guy every single time. As a matter of fact, our Sapphire events, which are like our user conferences, we knew everybody there. I'm like, can we invite some people we don't know? Right? And so what the reason was, they were terrified to go and talk to people they didn't know because they didn't know what to say to them. So we did this thing in our QBRs. They would come in and talk about their deals, and we say, who's the sponsor on your deal? And they'd inevitably say the CIO. And we go, okay, well, this is a high-tech company, right? And product management is the key to this company. Who runs product management for them? No idea. Okay, who runs development for them? I have no idea. Okay, who runs? So what we found is that we would do these things called relationship and white space heat maps. So we'd put up an account, and we'd literally say, okay, here's the VP of HR, the VP of Finance, the VP of Treasury, the VP of Manufacturing, the VP of Product Management, like fill in the functional area. And then what the rep was responsible for doing, and they would have to get the team to help them, was what is the thing that that person goes to bed terrified about every night? What is it? What is it? And what's our use case that we can articulate that can address that issue? And what other customer have we done it for? And when you started to do that, one, they started to actually know who people were, right? And two, they started to, okay, now I know what to say and what to go actually articulate to them. Because if they don't know, they won't go and do it. And so you can't land and expand if you go talk to the same person over and over again, I guess is my point.
Well, I want to build on that because, I sit in an interesting position where I am a CIO, and we in part sell to CIOs amongst other roles. So when I first took on the job, I got together with my buddy, Ian, who's the CIO at SFO Airport. And first off, I was amazed that SFO Airport needs a CIO, but he's got a very cool job. And I said, Ian, how do you think about a company like New Relic? And we had just gone public, and we were sitting at lunch, and he gave me the rules that I now live by. And I've tested this with probably 100 CIOs, and they may use different words, but they all fundamentally agree with this is how they make decisions. First and foremost, it doesn't sound too great, but it's the popularity contest. So if you're selling to a public company, enterprise organization, what I mean by the popularity contest is the old IBM rule. Nobody got fired for buying IBM. CIOs are inherently risk adverse. They need to change. They need to be more, willing to take on new opportunities to drive revenue. But at the end of the day, the vast majority, 99.9% of CIOs have grown up being afraid of being fired because something went wrong. So the last thing they want to do is take a gamble on some new technology that's going to get them fired. And so the popularity contest means that you're public, and if you're not public, you've got good logos that you can talk about, that somebody else has used you, that you're in some popular publication like the Wall Street Journal or something else like that. There's something that makes it seem like you're a real company. So that's the first. The second thing on the list actually surprised me. He said, the second thing I look for, if you pass that test, and these are in priority order, it is what he calls the vision test. And ultimately, people do not want to be switching out technology every other day. And so what they care more about than what you do today is where are you going? Because any CIO of a public company is going to have a 2 to 3 year vision, which seems like a really long time horizon for somebody in a startup. But it's pretty common because it takes a long time to change behavior and change process. And so they want to know not just what are you doing today. So for New Relic, the story is, yeah, we do application performance monitoring today. But what we're really about is business insights on the software that's increasingly running the airport. That's what he wanted to hear. And then the final thing is, okay, well, what's the pain point you solve today? And how do I know you solve it at a competitive price point? And this is where, I love Ian, but he goes, Yvonne, I talk to the folks who use your technology today. These are the people who are like the credit card swipe guys. And he goes, I couldn't find one thing they don't like about it. He's like, maybe I can complain about price, but that's where that lands in the people who actually use it. It's really important. People had daily use and value out of it. And those are kind of the 3 rules that I apply and I've tested with folks really matter. And so what I would suggest, if you are trying to sell somewhere to a CIO or a CTO, think really long and hard about what are the bars that you have to cover, And on that first one, the popularity contest, I probably get over 100 to 200, most likely automated generated emails a day. I get invited to the best restaurants in San Francisco with the best executives who are gonna go talk, I get offered drones, sunglasses, trips to Sonoma. I have had somebody send to the office cooking stuff with an opportunity to do a cooking class with a 5-star chef.
There you go.
The techniques they're immense, and I don't respond to any of them. What I respond to is what any of my CIO peers say is a good company to talk to. And so when you want to get those first few logos, find a warm introduction. I wouldn't spend a whole lot of money on email campaigns. Find that first introduction, be at a conference where somebody notable talks about your technology, or get enough people who are lower down the organization who actually use it and care about it, to then ask up the chain to have the company sponsor it.
That's valuable. Those are all good tips. I have to do a lot of this in my own company, so I'm gonna watch this recording afterwards again to make sure I wrote it all down. So what are your tips for how to do this? Are there particular tools or approaches? And as the company transitions through all of this, what are the things that we should expect to watch out for and make sure it doesn't go wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously being a company runs sales enablement is such a key aspect. I think people kind of view it as maybe of a training function, but it's really around actually creating these use cases and actually creating plays that your sales understands that in these type of use cases, these are the type of messages you use, these are the type of questions you ask. We have a number of our customers that have actually really have thought about how you actually identify 10 to 20 horizontal or vertical plays, and actually then create all of the scenarios within that to then initially land, and then what do you do once you expand? And so really mechanizing your business is obviously a key aspect of that. The other thing I'm a big believer in is this whole concept of, I call it Agile Selling, which is really applying the principles of Agile development and actually applying them in a selling context. And so what I mean by that is a lot of times, instead of kind of thinking you can figure everything out in an ivory tower, go out and create a minimum viable concept or a minimum viable message and go out and start trying it. This whole kind of concept of lean prototyping that's being used on the product side, try that on the sales side, and try that on the engagement side, and try that on the customer success side. And it's amazing how much you'll learn, and then you'll really iterate, and eventually you'll realize you've got a pattern, and that's when you scale. And I think one of the obvious things is there's a graveyard of companies and CEOs who have timed it incorrectly, and oftentimes end up timing it too early, where they think they've got a pattern and then they start scaling. I wouldn't have had a 20-year career if every founder actually time things perfectly. Unfortunately, most companies that raise a lot of capital, unfortunately, time it incorrectly. So really, I think this whole concept of kind of lean prototyping your business and lean typing your engagement model for land and expand, I think is a really key point. So.
Yeah, so in the interest, I'll just give you a couple in the interest of time. One is when the profile of the account executive, when you're doing land and expand, if there were two traits that you could hire for, in my opinion, it would be curiosity and empathy. Because that's really what the land and expand model is built on. Curiosity, insanely curious account executives want to know about companies and want to learn about them and uncover issues. And they ask questions. And empathy too, to really put themselves into the shoes of their stakeholders. That's what I would hire for. That, by the way, that's a rare combination to find. Second is that, in a land and expand, I'll go back to one of my earlier points, if you don't do the land right, it can become an albatross for you. So I'll maybe leave with a little anecdotal. So when I was at SAP, we had this little company called Walt Disney that was a really big customer of ours. And we had a bunch of deals, and we sold to and that's a big company if you ever sold to them, and there's all the different divisions of Disney, and there's 7 CIOs, and they each have their own kingdom, right? But so we were having some deals that were stuck in the pipe, and we couldn't get them through, and there was some negative wind, and we didn't know why. And I was actually talking to a partner at Accenture, and he's like, hey, I was at a conference the other day, and the VP of HR at Disney was slamming SAP and saying it was the worst HR implementation ever. And I was like, well, and then somebody else told me that. And then one of the people at Disney told me that. I'm like, well, I better go talk to this VP of HR. So I flew down to Burbank, and I'm like, dude, what's going on? Like, I've looked in the logs, and there's not a single escalation issue. There's no technical support issues. What's going on? And he said, my users over open enrollment they revolted because it was really difficult to use and the usability wasn't great. So it's the worst HR implementation ever. I was like, okay, hold on. Before we start throwing those things around, I go, let me look into it. So I sent some of my guys down and I sent some of my value engineering guys down. These are guys like ex-McKinsey guys that look at business benefits. And I went back to meet this VP of HR and I said, look, let's stop for a moment and remember why you did this, right? You put a business case together that said you were going to save Disney $30 million a year by moving to this HR system. I know you did that because I helped you build that business case and we went and pitched it to your board. Well, we went and looked and you haven't saved $30 million a year over the last 3 years. You saved $60 million a year over the last 3 years. And I go, by the way, nowhere in that business case did it say delight your end users. Now, I'm not saying that that's not important, but the benefit was $30 million and you've doubled it. And he's like, holy shit, this is the best HR implementation ever. I should go tell the board. I'm like, yeah. So I'm like, okay, we got to fix the user issue, but remembering how to articulate the value and reminding them, right? Because we get wrapped around usage. Delighting an end user is very different than driving value for a company. And we get stuck sometimes in delighting the end users, which is great because they're great people and we want to do it. But remember what we're really doing. At the enterprise level, users matter less to executives than the benefit.
On that note, I mean, we could talk about this for hours, but in the interest of time, it's a wrap. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
So
All right,
much.
thank you.